Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Friday, April the 2nd, 2021. If you were listening yesterday, you will recall that President Joe Biden waded into the contentious Georgia boycott battle by voicing support for moving All-Star game. Now, I also mentioned yesterday, I quoted from President Biden, who said, "I think today's professional athletes are acting incredibly responsibly. I would strongly support them doing that," moving the All-Star game. "People look to them. They're leaders. Look what's happened with the NBA as well. Look what's happened across the board. The very people who are victimized the most are the people who are the leaders in these various sports, and it's just not right." Again, demonstrating that Joe Biden is a senile buffoon, because what I just read makes no sense whatsoever. But I suppose Rob Manfred, who is the Major League Baseball commissioner, he got his marching orders. Or to use a different metaphor, when Biden says grovel, Major League Baseball says how low. So here's the news from today from MSN Sports. Major League Baseball has moved this year's All-Star Game out of Atlanta following controversy generated by Georgia's restrictive new voting law. Over the last week, we have engaged in thoughtful conversations with clubs, former and current players, the Players Association, and the Players Alliance, among others, to listen to their views, said Rob Manfred. "I have decided that the best way to demonstrate our values as a sport is by relocating this year's All-Star Game and Major League Baseball draft." Manfred said the new host city and details about events will be announced shortly. The Atlanta Braves are deeply disappointed by the decision of Major League Baseball to move its 2021 All-Star Game. The team said, "This was neither our decision nor our recommendation. We are saddened that fans will not be able to see this event in our city. The Braves organization will continue to stress the importance of equal voting opportunities, and we had hoped our city could use this event as a platform to have the discussion." The new law, passed by the Georgia House and Senate and then signed by Governor Brian Kemp March 25th, has generated controversy due to several limits it puts on voting in the state. The bill was passed along party lines, with Republicans vocally supporting it and Democrats calling it voter suppression. Governor Kemp said today Major League Baseball caved to fear, political opportunism, and liberal lies. Georgians and all Americans should fully understand what the MLB's knee-jerk decision means. Cancel culture and woke political activists are coming for every aspect of your life, sports included. If the left doesn't agree with you, facts and the truth do not matter. The chief executives of Atlanta-based Delta Airlines and Coca-Cola forcefully condemned the bill Wednesday, a change from prior public stances. After the bill was passed, Delta's CEO praised aspects of it, while a Coca-Cola executive said the corporation was disappointed in the outcome. As it turns out, one needs ID to get on Delta airplanes. How about that? And the Georgia legislature responded to Delta by eliminating a tax break, which they had previously benefited from. Hang on just one second here. Forgot to close the door. Okay, so Major League Baseball has made its decision, and I have made mine. I'm done with Major League Baseball. I am not watching. I'm not following it, not watching it, nothing. This was a long time coming. Jackie Robinson Day is one of the things that pushed me to my decision. Of course, Jackie Robinson was the first black player in Major League Baseball, and he played for the Brooklyn Dodgers, and he is in the Hall of Fame. He was a very good player. But starting in 2004, Major League Baseball decided that baseball was primarily about race and not sport. All players in all teams were banned from using Robinson's number 42. And on Jackie Robinson Day, all the players and the coaches and the staff from both teams must wear the number 42. Essentially, what Major League Baseball was saying and is saying, they have a Jackie Robinson Day every year, is that baseball was an illegitimate sport before Jackie Robinson entered the league. Well, I wonder how far they're going to take this. So they've banned the number 42. How about banning any numbers that contain the numeral 4 or the numeral 2? How about invalidating all records by baseball players that were formed before 1947, which is when Robinson integrated baseball? How about renaming homers Jackies? I wouldn't put any of this past Major League Baseball, frankly. For some years now, MLB has been whining about the fact that there are few black players in the game. Actually, this is a lie. There are many, many black players in Major League Baseball. The problem is that they don't come from the United States. Now, part of this is the result of Major League Baseball's own policy to prioritize players from the Caribbean instead of American players. But another part of the reason is that Black Americans just don't like baseball all that much anymore. They don't like playing it, and they don't like watching it, which, of course, is their decision. They've decided they much prefer football and especially basketball. And again, they can't be forced to like baseball. They used to, but they don't. In Toronto, there is a constant carrying on about the Blue Jays are too white. The Toronto Star had an infamous headline some years ago, White Jays. Oh, so it's all white people on the Toronto Blue Jays team. Well, no, it isn't. They were only the White Jays if you didn't count Carlos Delgado and a whole bunch of other black players on the team. Carlos Delgado at the time being their biggest star, but of course they're from the Caribbean, so they're not really black. There's been all the nonsense about COVID, with fans not being allowed in the stands, and last year's season being an absolute travesty. Oh, and fake fans and fake fan noise were instituted, making this a Potemkin village experience. Also, you had teams deciding they weren't going to play because they were upset about someone being shot. And of course, they weren't, they should have forfeited the game. No, but that would have been insensitive. The reason I stuck with baseball longer than any other sports is it was the last sport that I could see that still emphasized sportsmanship. That means that baseball still isn't a game that celebrates the humiliation of the opponent, but the sports writers are pushing very hard to eliminate sportsmanship. Oh, yes, playing the game the right way, which is a code for white supremacism. When a particularly neat double play is achieved on the field, you don't have the players doing a bunch of dances or pointing fingers at the people who've been called out. That will probably be coming soon. The rule about hitting a home run. You hit the home run, and then you trot around the bases. You don't stand there and admire it forever, and you don't have some sort of elaborate bat flip like Jose Bautista, again, which is very bad sportsmanship. But no, we should all be celebrating Jose Bautista's bat flip. I celebrated when Jose Bautista got clocked, quite rightly, by Rugged Odor of the Texas Rangers. In more Biden baseball news, this is from ESPN, Aldous Gonzalez. President Joe Biden, speaking the night before Major League ballparks reopened to fans throughout the country, stressed the importance of wearing masks and continuing to abide by health and safety protocols to prevent the spread of COVID-19, calling it a mistake for the Texas Rangers to open their stadium at full capacity for opening day. The Rangers Globe Life Field, which can seat 40,300 people, is the only Major League Baseball stadium that will allow 100% crowd capacity on its opening day. Quote, well, that's a decision they made. I think it's a mistake. They should listen to Dr. Fauci, the scientists, and the experts. But I think it's not responsible. So does he want to be president of the United States, or does he want to be commissioner? He'd be terrible in either of these jobs. But yes, breaking news, I have decided I am done with baseball. And I hope others join me. Let's go to the chat. Anren says, a happy and blessed Easter, Kevin and chat. Why, thank you. Hello to Helper Dan, Popcasso88, Tricky Who, Metal Mike. Prussian Junker says, there's a Gramscian hegemony that exists. We should acknowledge that. The proof that you need is the commissioner of Major League Baseball is a Gramscian, or at least subordinate to that hegemony. Tricky Who says, bad thoughts, MLB. Popcasso88 says, no escape from the pause. Helper says, all-star voting is the model for the current U.S. system. Tricky Who says, nope, don't even think about downvoting any of their stupid pause videos, neither. How dare you? I don't think I've talked about this, that YouTube announced a couple of days ago that it's likely going to get rid of the dislike button because evil people, presumably Russian bots or white supremacists, all get together in battalions to vote down Disney trailers and Joe Biden public utterances. It's kind of embarrassing that Joe Biden's appearances on YouTube get pitiful audiences, but this should not in any way dissuade us from the incontrovertible belief that Joe Biden is the most popular president in American history, as evidenced by the 82 million entirely legitimate votes that he collected last November the 3rd. Yo Mama says Jackie Robinson died for your sins. Interestingly enough, Jackie Robinson was a Republican for most of his life, a Nixon supporter in 1960. Sadly, at the end of his life, he became enormously bitter. And as did Hank Aaron. Hank Aaron was treated very well by the Atlanta Braves. Yes, there were a bunch of idiots who said stupid things when he was about to eclipse Babe Ruth's all-time home run record. But in 1961, when Roger Maris eclipsed Babe Ruth's single-season home run record, he was met with death threats, many of them, and all sorts of unpleasantness. Quachalango says, curling is the last stand of implicit white identity. Hello to William Hicks. Curling and chess, says Ann Run. Every time Kevin is about to start the stream, my girlfriend calls. Hopefully I only missed baseball talk, says Head McNeck. British American says, hat tip to Mark Stein. Western civilization is whiter than Frosty the Snowman after falling into a vat of white out. White. William Hicks says, baseball has manners. If one team breaks with the etiquette, your best player gets one in the gut. After the controversy of Jose Bautista, particularly his comeuppance, there's so many women involved in baseball, and this is another reason why I'm leaving. This atavistic code of baseball, it just has to go. It's toxic masculinity. Let's see. First name can't pronounce. Second name Gameston. The most popular president in U.S. history has the public appeal of Amy Schumer. Was this Amy Schumer before or after she started to do extremely graphic feminine hygiene ads? Did she think this through? That any vestige of sexual appeal that she had, that remained, is now gone? forever. David Wright says, what took you so long? Haven't watched in 5 or 6 years. Jay Miller says, I'll join you, Kevin. I used to be a diehard Yankees fan, but not anymore. Rob Manfred and the MLB are a large-grade ocean-going pillock. I like watching tennis, says Quachilango. Well, yeah. I think that one of the arguments for the male players getting more money than the female players, well, people are more interested in the male tennis, is because it's a best out of 5 sets instead of 3. I think that male tennis would be vastly improved if they played best 2 out of 3 sets. Because these 5-set matches, they simply last too long. Also, there's a tendency for players to simply tank sets in order to preserve energy. MF Superstar says, unfortunately for blacks, now they are either bitter or they're Uncle Toms. British American says, Amy Schumer is just gross. Throw up in your mouth. Gross. Paul Casso, 88. Agrees. She is literally related to Charles Schumer, says Chogokin 666. Yes, I knew that. Tricky Who makes a joke. Schumer is hot for an 80-year-old senator. Yo Mama says, if I swore off the Ohio State Buckeyes, my family would disown me. Yeah, college football. College football has been corrupt for an awfully long time. It was corrupt when Vince Lombardi was a college player at Fordham. It was corrupt when Red Blakey coached West Point. But now it's just an absolute joke. It's disgrace to the university system in the United States. NBA debate possible about pay equity compared with WNBA, says MF Superstar. That is just too funny. Because the only people who care about women's basketball are the women who play it and lesbians. And there are not all that many lesbians in the United States, even before it was somehow decided that lesbianism is passé and all of these women have to become men instead. Breaking 911 reports George Floyd seen flatlining in new video played in court as first paramedic on scene says he knew he was already dead. And back Deus Volt live on Indiegogo, aka at John De La Rose, comments he didn't even die on the scene, but in the paramedic vehicle. The cops did nothing wrong. Every institution, including churches who gaslit white people and inspired mass rioting and looting, owe all of us an apology. And the reporters who spread the fake news should go to jail. Russia has some thoughts about this. This is from Agence France Presse. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Thursday warned that anti-white racism might be building in the United States and said that political correctness taken to the extreme would have lamentable consequences. In an interview with political scientists broadcast on national television, Moscow's top diplomat said Russia had long supported a worldwide trend that everyone wants to get rid of racism. We were pioneers of the movement promoting equal rights of people of any skin color, he said. But Lavrov stressed it was important not to switch to the other extreme, which we saw during the BLM events and the aggression against white people, white U.S. citizens. Lavrov accused the United States of seeking to spread what he called a cultural revolution around the world. They have colossal possibilities for it, he said in an interview. Hollywood is now also changing its rules so that everything reflects the diversity of modern society, calling that a form of censorship. I've seen black people play in Shakespeare's comedies, only I don't know when there will be a white Othello. You're preaching to the choir, Mr. Lavrov. You see, this is absurd. Political correctness taken to the point of absurdity will not end well. And of course, oh no, those evil Russians, to which the Russians will respond quite rightly, leaders in Britain, Canada, the United States are all groveling Oh no, white supremacy. It's always been white supremacy. Oh, so how dare you criticize us? If you are admitting that your countries have been evil from their inception, well, in Britain's case, not since inception, I suppose since the 1950s, when they decided to start importing large numbers of Black people out of their poverty. In the Caribbean, Don Lemon, I've talked about his stupidity before, but let's talk about the stupidity of Cornel West, who I believe is a esteemed university professor and author. This is from Pam Key at Breitbart. CNN anchor Don Lemon broke down crying Thursday on his show after Cornel West got emotional, calling for Black folk to intervene if they witness a police incident like the one that resulted in the death of George Floyd. West said, quote, "When you talk about brother George Perry Floyd Jr., you're talking about a human being, about a precious son of George Perry Floyd Sr. and precious Larsenia Jones Floyd." Larsenia? Seriously? The mother of a crook was called Larsenia? Anyway, back to Professor West. You're talking about what it means to open yourself, to get beyond the stereotypes and acknowledge that for the first nearly 100 years, America failed, no question. Didn't stay in contact with the humanity of young people. You enslaved us, you tortured us, you tried to barbarize us, and we responded with making your democracy better, with more love, more freedom. Do we have what it takes to really acknowledge the rich humanity of Black folk, to treat us fairly like human beings? Because if not, you're going to lose your democracy. You're going under. You're going fascist. If it wasn't for Black voters, especially Black women voters, you would have gone fascist under the gangster named Trump. I'm telling you, brother, if the police can't do it, we have to do it ourselves. I'll tell you this too. Let me add one thing, brother. I thought Brother George. I thought about my brother, and I thought about my father, and I thought about my grandfather. I'm not going to stand there for 9 minutes and 29 seconds and watch somebody murder my father. No, no, no. Martin Luther King Jr. talked about pacifism. I believe in nonviolence, but I'm not going to watch that kind of murder. I love my brother, Charles McMillan. That's why he was crying. That's what his tears were about. He felt helpless. We are not going to do that. Some of us Black folk, some of us Black men, we are not going on standing there. We're going to have to intervene in some way. You aren't going to kill us like that, and we remain spectators, unquote. Referencing Lemon's book, This is the Fire, West said, somewhere I read, silence is not an option. I don't stand with the silence. That's the last two sentences of your letter to Drew, your letter to your nephew. But America needs to understand that too. We've got to self-respect. We've got to self-defense. We intervene when you start killing us like that, unquote. Crying and holding his face, Lemon said, I'm sorry. Sorry to whom? For what? So Don Lemon wrote a book called This is the Fire. I suppose this is referencing James Baldwin's famous book, The Fire Next Time. Of course, James Baldwin was an effeminate homosexual. In fact, Jack and Bobby Kennedy used to call him Martin Luther Queen. Don Lemon is this is the fire, says another effeminate homosexual. I had no idea Cornel West was so unhinged. And, oh dear, crisis in the soccer world. No, sorry, not soccer, football. The last topic to interest us, Poland refuses to take knee versus England after comments by football boss. This is from RT. Poland became the latest team to disregard the act of taking a knee prior to the World Cup qualifier against England on Wednesday, with the country's football chief saying continuing to do so was their last topic of interest. The action of players kneeling in the moments before kickoff has become widespread in global sports since the wave of social protests, which began in the United States following the death of George Floyd last May and the ensuing Black Lives Matter protests. The protests subsequently bled into football and have become commonplace in many major European leagues and international games, but a growing sense of malcontent has been noticeable in recent months as some figures within sport have begun to dismiss the gesture as mere tokenism and entirely ineffective at attacking the root of perceived racial and social inequality. Moments before kickoff in the qualifier at London's Wembley Stadium Wednesday, the Polish players opted to remain standing and instead pointed to a badge on their sleeves displaying a UEFA respect message, with the entire England starting 11 taking a knee inside their half of the pitch in a move similar to that of the Czech Republic before their game with Wales on Monday. And perhaps influenced by the Czech team's decision, Polish football chief and former legendary midfield Zbigniew Boniek outlined before Wednesday's kickoff that it was unlikely that his team would join their English counterparts in kneeling. Well, there were never any black people in Czechia or Poland. I should think that there are very, very few there now. Sports writer Sam Street, I think he got the gist of this. The Poland team were never going to take the knee, the embodiment of everything their country struggled against for 45 years. Someone calling us the Serbinator says, of course they weren't. They are not brainwashed. Poland is one of the rare places in Europe where Western indoctrination and propaganda aren't powerful. Yes, except with regard to COVID-19. And yes, speaking of COVID-19, how about that for a segue? Huh? See what I did there? This is from Revolver News by Dr. Michael Thau. Informed consent isn't possible when the opinions of renowned experts are being censored by those who control which voices we get to hear. Way back in January 2020, I reported on the thousands of doctors and scientists desperately trying to get the word out that Dr. Fauci's program of economic ruin and crippling social isolation had no scientific justification whatsoever. Yet to this day, the media and tech giants have managed to keep most of the public in the dark about the existence of any dissenting opinions on the wisdom of a historically unprecedented public health strategy that's rained down more misery and death on the American people than our worst foreign foes could have imagined, but coincidentally has turned out to be a financial windfall for tech giants and multinational corporations like Facebook and Amazon. And speaking of foreign enemies, only a tiny percentage of Americans know that the whole idea of locking down in response to a respiratory virus had never been so much as suggested in all of history until China's Communist Party rulers started pushing it on the rest of the world in 2020. Just 5 months before lockdowns were imposed, the World Health Organization had soundly rejected even the much weaker pandemic mitigation strategy of quarantining symptomless people with a history of exposure. If any of the above crucial facts had been widely reported, no one in their right mind would have consented to the madness of lockdowns. Now that the subject of relentless government and media propagandizing has switched from lockdowns to vaccines, however, the censorship of dissenting expert voices has been ramped up accordingly. You've probably never even heard of Harvard University's Dr. Martin Kulldorff, one of the world's most cited epidemiologists and infectious disease experts. And it's next to certain that you've never heard of the document eviscerating the madness of lockdowns that he and over 55,000 other scientists and medical professionals have signed on to, the Great Barrington Declaration. Well, yes, let's talk a little bit more about informed consent, because that has become an issue. But before that, let's talk about the hysteria in Ontario, which is Canada's most populous province. Ottawa imposes 4-week province-wide shutdown to combat spike in COVID-19 cases. Premier Doug Ford says the change will take effect Saturday. The government is asking Ontarians to limit trips outside the home to necessities such as food, medication, and other essential services, but stop short of imposing a stay-at-home order like it did in January. Oh, Ontarians don't have to stay at home entirely? Well, golly, people are upset about that. The panic porn merchants. This is from Matt Gurney, TV Ontario. I'd hate to see what Chief Medical Officer of Health David Williams would agree was a failure if this isn't one that's horrifying. My TVO colleague, John Michael McGrath, is developing a specialization in creating viral moments in Ontario public health briefings. On Thursday morning, as provincial experts rolled out updated data and projections for Ontario's third wave, the numbers are bad, folks. McGrath asked a question via telephone. Dr. Williams, he said, this is a failure. This is a policy failure. We were warned about the third wave. We have failed to avoid it. Who is responsible for this failure? Did you give the cabinet bad advice, or did the cabinet fail to follow better advice that the public wasn't aware of? As if the public has any say in this. Perhaps we should sew people's lips shut. They could still breathe through their nose, and they could still get food intravenously. If we sewed people's lips shut, then we could just wear, a little strip around our nose when we go out in public. That would vastly cut down on the amount of stuff being expelled from our mouth, because it wouldn't be possible, and also ingested through the mouth. Why isn't anyone investigating this? Come on, scientists, pull the finger out. Oh, and from Randall Denley in the National Post, Ford's latest lazy lockdown plan show he hasn't learned from the last ones. If Ontarians are lucky, Ford's limited moves will buy enough time for vaccinations to bring COVID cases down. Who knows? If you try the same thing often enough, it might eventually work. No, they don't work. Why don't we compare Ontario to every other place in the world? Oh, let's talk about New Zealand and Australia, which are islands at the bottom of the world, especially New Zealand, which are two small islands at the bottom of the world, which went absolutely nuts and completely smashed its economy over a relative handful of cases. New Zealand has adopted a zero COVID policy, which means entropy. It means the death of society and the destruction of the economy. But that seems to be the direction that the media has moved toward. We must have zero COVID. This is from the Ottawa Citizen. An elected member of the Ontario legislature has invoked one of history's most evil, murderous dictators. What are you talking about, Hitler here? I had no idea he was one of history's most evil, murderous dictators. This is news to me. This is what I look for from the media, is to tell us who Hitler was. One of history's most evil, murderous dictators to complain about the provincial government's month-long shutdown to curb the spread of COVID-19. Randy Hillier, the independent MPP, that means member of the provincial parliament, for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston, used social media to post a picture of Adolf Hitler looking over Nazi followers with the caption, "The Third Wave." Here's what Hillier wrote with the image he posted on Twitter. "The third wave, everyone who's ever been to the sea knows that there is no end to waves." I like that. That's quite good. It's only 28 days this time. Time does not mind being questioned. Lies do not like to be challenged. Hillier, a self-proclaimed true believer of freedom, justice, and democracy, was flooded with responses questioning his juxtaposition of Hitler with COVID-19 health protection measures. Oh, because the left never invokes Hitler. Never, never, never. It's not like they ever compared Donald Trump to Hitler, because that would be terribly disrespectful of the Holocaust and terribly insulting to Jews, except Sarah Silverman and many, many more Jewish people delighted in comparing Hitler to Trump, saying Silverman said that Trump was worse than Hitler. On Saturday, the entire province moves into a 4-week shutdown for much of the economy. Restaurants won't have on-site dining, fitness centers will close, and retailers will be required to have reduced capacities. Hillier was first elected as a progressive conservative MPP in 2007, but was kicked out of the Tory caucus in February 2019 over remarks he made in the provincial legislature when there was a discussion about support for families of autistic children. So what did he say? Ottawa Citizen? During the pandemic, Hillier has criticized lockdowns and mask-wearing requirements as health authorities try to contain the spread of COVID-19. He is a member of the End the Lockdowns National Caucus of elected people challenging province-wide lockdowns. On Friday morning, Hitler took note of the outrage over his Hitler post and doubled down. Looks like all those who support or promote tyranny, lockdowns, ending democracy, and the importation of authoritarian measures don't like this meme. How ironic. Past time to call out those who are destroying our great country and defend our freedoms. Some Twitter users said that they were reporting Hitler's post to the social media company because you're not allowed to compare anyone to Hitler. But we just had that discussion like a minute ago. Hillier has already received a timeout, oh, how very childish, from Twitter after posting false information, one that included his view that there's no pandemic and that wearing a mask perpetuates the falsehood and lie. Yeah. So why would he mention Hitler in particular? Well, I'm going to read from a legal document from the Nuremberg Military Tribunal dated August the 19th, 1947. Entitled Nuremberg Code establishes the principle of informed consent. Since ancient times, beneficence has been a key principle of the medical profession enshrined in the Hippocratic Oath and subsequent codes of medical ethics. Beneficence entails that physicians must always put the needs and welfare of patients first. By extension, bioscientists must always put the needs and welfare of human research subjects first. However, until the verdict was handed down in the Nuremberg doctors' trial, the specific rights of human subjects of modern biomedical research were not codified. 23 physicians, including Karl Brandt, Adolf Hitler's personal physician, were charged as defendants at Nuremberg. The most notorious offender, Josef Mengele of Auschwitz, escaped and was never brought to trial. One of the most important outcomes of the doctor's trial was the portion of the verdict subtitled Permissible Medical Experiments, which defined the concept of informed consent. Number one, the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. This means that the person involved should have legal capacity to give consent, should be so situated as to be able to exercise free power of choice without the intervention of any element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior form of constraint or coercion, and should have sufficient knowledge and comprehension of the elements of the subject matter involved as to enable him to make an understanding and enlightened decision. This latter element requires that before the acceptance of an affirmative decision by the experimental subject, there should be made known to him the nature, duration, and purpose of the experiment, the method and means by which it is to be conducted, all inconveniences and hazards reasonably to be expected, and the effects upon his health or person which may possibly come from his participation in the experiment. The duty and responsibility for ascertaining the quality of the consent rests upon each individual who initiates, directs, or engages in the experiment. It is a personal duty and responsibility which may not be delegated to another with impunity. Once again, I'm reading from the Nuremberg Military Tribunal. So what do we have? We've got warp speed vaccines. Yes, rushed to the people. And with very little in the way of testing, very little. And we have blanket immunity for all the pharmaceutical companies that make the vaccines. We have a dearth of reporting on the results of these vaccines, and we have talk of vaccine passports, that people will be told that essentially their lives will be over if they do not get the vaccine. Oh, but apparently Joe Biden is going down the neoconservative route that, oh no, this won't be a government mandate. We're just going to come up, we're going to set up the playing field for private companies to tell you that you won't be able to buy anything or go anywhere unless you get the vaccine. This doesn't seem to me to be at all in the spirit of Nuremberg. So perhaps those people who are screaming at Randy Hillier should acquaint themselves with the facts on this matter and learn what informed consent means. Some good news from Florida. This is from Mary Chastain at Legal Insurrection. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis issued an executive order banning anyone from requiring or issuing COVID-19 vaccine passports. He tweeted today, "I issued an executive order. The legislature is working on making permanent these protections for Floridians, and I look forward to signing them into law soon." The executive order forbids any Florida government entity, quote, to issue vaccine passports, vaccine passes, or other standardized documentation for the purpose of certifying an individual's COVID-19 vaccination status to a third party, unquote. They also cannot publish or share anyone's COVID-19 vaccination status. Businesses cannot require patrons or customers to provide any documentation certifying COVID-19 vaccination or post-transmission recovery to gain access to, entry upon, or service from the business. 3 cheers for Ron DeSantis. Of course, this is setting up the possibility of a civil war in the United States between Biden and various recalcitrant governors. What's Biden going to do? Is he going to start withdrawing funds from those states which do not require vaccine passports, or even better, make them illegal? I saw it suggested a few weeks ago that perhaps he could cut these states off from the SWIFT system. So essentially their money would be worthless. And also some good news from Britain. This is from Sarah Nafton at the London Telegraph. Lockdowns are unlikely to be needed again as Britain learns to treat coronavirus like flu, Professor Chris Whitty said. The chief, Latrine Wallace, said that up to 25,000 people die in a bad flu year without anyone noticing, and that accepting some COVID deaths would be the price of keeping schools and business open and allowing people to live a whole life. Professor Whitty, speaking on a Royal School of Medicine webinar, said the government would only be forced to, quote, pull the alarm cord, unquote, if a dangerous variant arrived against which people had no immunity and which sparked exponential growth. Well, you see, he has inserted a loophole, a very, very large loophole here. But let's hope that some common sense has finally come to Britain after a year plus of, well, insanity. Speaking of insanity, this is almost too good to be true, but apparently it is. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. Spain has passed a new law forcing people to wear face masks everywhere outside and even while swimming in the sea. Yes, really. The legislation, which came into effect Wednesday, mandates face coverings for children as young as 6, with refuseniks facing fines of €100. The only exception to the rule is adults playing sports outside, but people tanning outside or swimming in a pool or the ocean are still required to cover up. This will apply to people who are sunbathing or even swimming in the sea, confirms the London Evening Standard. The utter stupidity and real danger of having to wear a face mask while swimming in the sea goes without saying. Having to wear a face covering while placing yourself in a situation where you have a heightened risk of encountering breathing difficulties is totally insane. Thankfully, there has been a huge backlash to the law, which has spread dismay throughout Spain's tourism industry, according to the London Times. We're going through the kind of hell that threatens to wipe out thousands and thousands of jobs and businesses, said Jose Luis Zorrida, vice president of Excelsior, the main lobby group for Spanish tourism. And now they want to turn the beaches into open-air field hospitals. One respondent on Twitter exemplified the sentiment of many potential holidaymakers that they would simply avoid Spain altogether. If Spain requires masks on the beach after May the 17th, I'll cancel my holiday to Marbella and go to Cyprus or Florida, where tourists' money is welcome. Let's go back to the chat. The Sea of Virtue, says Dan. Mask-shaped untanned spots, says Gamston. Claudius played the idiot, but he was quite adept, says Chogokin666. So we're talking about the Roman Empire. Anran says, should they wear a mask while scuba diving as well? Oh, yeah, Chogokin666 said, what Caesar would Biden be if he were a Roman monarch? A short lived one, I should think. Palpicasso 88 says Frum's 2003 article on unpatriotic conservatives turned me off National Review forever. Well, it was a bitter pill to swallow. You have this Canadian telling, Robert Novak and Thomas Fleming and Pat Buchanan and Jude Aniski and a whole host of others that they're not real Americans. They're not real Americans because they don't believe in forever wars. Respectable commenting name says, I heard an interesting idea that the end goal was to completely destroy HIPAA protections so pharma can get in on this sweet data racket. That is interesting. William Hicks says, guess all those privacy notices we get in the mail are a bunch of crap, eh? Metal Mike says, Buckley, before his death, finally questioned the Iraq War and was quickly thrown under the bus by his friends. Well, that's what you get for a lifetime of social climbing. I was a great admirer of William F. Buckley Jr. when I was a child. I started subscribing to National Review when I was 14. I bought all his books. I read all his books. There's not a lot there, really. I suppose I'm thankful to him for introducing me to much greater, much more significant thinkers than he was. What do you think about MGTOW dictionary destroying PUAs? Men going their own way, dictionary destroying PUAs. I'm not sure I understand that. Vidal was more right-wing in some ways than Buckley, says Palpicasso 88. Metal Mike says, I read in Chronicles how Buckley quickly moved away from the old right after being seduced by the neocons. Well, again, he was a social climber. And you would think that actually being publicly humiliated by Norman Podhoretz at, whatever advanced age he was at, shouldn't you be able to get to a certain age where you just tell someone else to pound sand? You're not ordering me around anymore. What can you do to me? Okay. Let's see. People vote for Hilliard. No one can silence him, says Metal Mike. Well, yeah, he's been kicked out of the Conservative caucus. There have been very few of these people who are kicked out of the caucus get voted in as independents. I'd like to see him being voted in. Bush was compared to Hitler on a regular basis, says Metal Mike. Thank you for reminding me of that. In fact, we got this meme, Bush Hitler. Remember that? McGee 406 says, according to Truman Capote, Bobby Kennedy tossed Gore Vidal out of the White House because he was drunk and obnoxious. Bobby allegedly called Vidal let's say a 5-letter word beginning with Q. What was that fellow? What was his name? Lazarov in Vancouver with his megaphone driving down Main Street saying, good work, people. Keep wearing those masks. Only 14 years to flatten the curve. And an enraged Asian man just went nuts. He started screaming obscenities at him and smashing his car with his bicycle, eventually shattering the passenger side window. And he was sitting on the passenger side. The fellow was arrested. Palpicasso 88 says, standing in line outside a grocery store yesterday, dudes ahead and behind me, infuriated by new lockdown. They were saying things about Doug Ford I wouldn't repeat in this chat. No, but you see, Doug Ford is not going far enough. And again, what about my idea? I want to hear about my idea about sewing people's lips together. I suppose, in 14 years, when, the panic is over, people's lips could be, unstitched. I suppose we'd have to make it an offense, and a pretty serious offense, for people to unstitch their own lips. There's a lot of work to be done on this proposal. I will admit that. From the Wall Street Journal, is church open for Easter? Answers vary across the U.S. and world. This is from Ian Lovett and Francis X. Roca. Reservations are required to attend Easter services at a Roman Catholic parish in San Francisco. When that was introduced in Victoria, it reminded me of an old religious joke, which I'm sure many of you have heard. There are no reserved seats in heaven. Oh, I have to tell these people my name. I have to reserve a seat. I have to give them my phone number, my email address, my other address, my street address. Oh, none of this was required before. I could just walk into the cathedral and sit down, take the best seat available. Oh, but now they need to know all of these things. And the word that they were sending out clearly was, you are not wanted. And I suspect that for a lot of priests, that they think that, life would be pretty good as a priest if they only didn't have to deal with parishioners. And now they don't have to deal with parishioners any longer. A Methodist church in the Kansas City, Missouri area is limiting attendance to 35% of its normal capacity. And at a church in Pasadena, California, the masks are off and the singing has resumed. Hooray for that. With vaccination rates climbing and daily COVID-19 cases down significantly from January highs, many pastors see welcome back their members this Sunday as symbolic not only of Jesus' resurrection, but of a return to something resembling normal 1 year after the pandemic forced most to shutter just before the holiest day in the Christian calendar. No, they were not forced to shutter their churches. They just jumped in, even before government interventions. And what I would like to see, if these people, if we had bishops in the Catholic Church worthy of their name, they would have stood at the front of the open doors of their cathedrals, holding a cross and crucifix, saying that the people will have their mass, the people will have their communion, and if you want to arrest me, go right ahead. But of course, none of them did that. And of course, in Ireland, it is now a criminal offense to have religious service. Criminal offense, which has resulted in something rather amusing, that people in the north of the Republic of Ireland are traveling across the border to Ulster to attend church over Holy Week. How about that? I suppose, again, COVID-19 has just been, wrong word, but you understand what I mean, a godsend for atheists. We can't have religious services anymore. We can't have singing anymore. We can't have the distribution of communion because of public health. Let's go to lockdown skeptics. 73 MPs are opposed in Britain to vaccine passports. MPs and peers. Keep in mind, there's something like, 650 MPs in the House of Commons. Pseudo-epidemic in France and Sweden as deaths drop below average. Despite the clear evidence from America of states without restrictions is experiencing no worse and often better outcomes than states with restrictions, the case for lockdowns continues to be pressed, with proponents pointing to the surges in France, which has just entered another lockdown, and across Europe as well as in Brazil. But are things actually as bad as being claimed by those eager to persuade us of the need to lock down? Europe's spring surge, which appears to be easing off now, has been driven in part by an increase in testing. France, for instance, has been spiking in positive cases. Yes, more testing, more cases. I don't know why this would be a surprise to people. So they've added some books to the Lockdown Skeptics library. Charles Mackay's Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. Edward Chancellor's Devil Take the Hindmost, A History of Financial Speculation. Philip Ziegler's The Black Death. Christopher Booker and Richard North's Scared to Death from BSE to Coronavirus. Rod Dreyer's Live Not by Lies, A Manual for Christian Dissidents. Francis Hale's A Delusion of Satan, the full story of the Salem witch trials. Keith Thomas's Religion and the Decline of Magic, Studies in Popular Beliefs in the 16th and 17th Century England. Czeslaw Milosz's The Captive Mind. Frank Ferretti's How Fear Works, Culture of Fear in the 21st Century. Juste Merluz's The Rape of the Mind, The Psychology of Thought Control, Menticide, and Brainwashing. Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago, Giorgio Agamben's Where Are We Now? The Epidemic as Politics, Eric Hoffer's The True Believer, Thoughts on the Nature of Mass Movements, Richard Legutko's The Demon in Democracy, Totalitarian Temptations in Free Societies, Fred Attenborough's Notes from the Bunderground, Culture in the Time of COVID-19, Johnny Pepiat's Frustrations of a Skeptic, Michel Foucault's Discipline and Punish, The Birth of the Prison. Actually, Foucault, for all his madness, is pretty good on this subject. I've read him, particularly his discussion of the Panopticon, and Jeremy Bentham's, yes, Panopticon, the Inspection House. We all have to be spied on at all times. This was thought, the Panopticon was thought to be a nightmarish idea, except, lunatics like Jeremy Bentham thought it was a wonderful idea. But now we're all in favor of the Panopticon. And the Atlantic has savaged, or so it believes, Alex Berenson. This is a badge of honor. It is difficult for me to think of a publication as disgusting and harmful as the Atlantic. And if you were attacked by the Atlantic, you should consider yourself to have been vindicated. It's called The Pandemic's Wrongest Man. In a crowded field of wrongness, one person stands out, Alex Berenson. This is by a fellow called Derek Thompson. This essay is all over the place, arguing against straw men, arguing against the things that Berenson has not proposed, cherry picking data. Let's see. Oh, yes. His final paragraph, his peroration. To be honest, I initially had serious doubts about publishing this piece. The trap of exposing conspiracy theories is obvious. To demonstrate why a theory is wrong, you have to explain it, and in doing so, incur the risk that some people will be convinced by the very theory you're trying to debunk. But that horse has left the barn. More than half of Republicans under the age of 50 say they simply won't get a vaccine. Their hesitancy is being fanned by right-wing hacks, Fox News showboats, and vaccine skeptics like Alex Berenson. The case for the vaccines is built upon the firm foundation of scientific discovery, clinical trial data, and real-world evidence. The case against the vaccines wobbles because it's built upon a steaming pile of bullshit. Yes, well, I was discussing informed consent, and we have nothing close to what could reasonably be called informed consent. Oh, no, but informed consent doesn't matter. Oh, this is a unique situation in the history of the world, apparently. That's what these clowns are telling us. And they're getting away with it for the most part. But again, maybe we'll just have one lockdown too many and the people will finally revolt. Berenson comments, he's quoting from the Atlantic article, I missed this wonderful tidbit yesterday, spelunking through research. In other words, reading papers. Dresses up with spooky language. In other words, writing. Thus, reporting becomes a dangerous act. Let's see. Joe Biden said too many Americans are acting as if this fight is over. It's a fight. It's a war. No, it isn't. And these military metaphors are not helpful. If the American people continue to do their part, yeah, you see, it's war again. Mask up, practice social distancing. We could have a more normal July the 4th, but this is still April, not July. Again, the President of the United States has informed his countrymen that if they do exactly as he says, they may be able to have a barbecue on Independence Day, but there won't be very many people allowed at this barbecue. But just keep following the instructions from President Dementia Patient, and perhaps you can have a little fun on July the 4th. Yes, Berenson writes, can anyone from Israel point me to the all-cause mortality data for the last several weeks? As several readers have noted, they appear to have vanished from Euromono. No doubt because they're so good, they would embarrass the rest of the world. Berenson also says, I'd like to thank Derek Thorpe, is that his name? Whatever his name, Thompson, and every one of the panic porners at the Atlantic for their hard work in promoting Unreported Truths 4, currently at number 12 on Amazon. Couldn't have done it without you, Derek. From the New York Times, as Cuomo sought $4 million book deal, AIDS hid damaging death toll. Berenson comments, well, that was $4 million badly spent, like $3.9 million loss before marketing costs badly spent. At least it went to a good cause, the Andrew Cuomo Legal Defense Fund. Think of all the meatballs they could have bought. And what are we going to talk about now? Oh, some more good news. Some more good news. From Steve Watson at Summit News, an effort to dim the sun to stop global warming has been scrapped by the Swedish Space Agency, which announced that the program funded by Bill Gates has, quote, divided the scientific community, unquote, and will therefore not be carried out. So we have a baseline here, people. What fiendishly monstrous project will science reject or not wholeheartedly embrace? Dimming the sun, blocking out the sun. The Swedish Space Corporation released a statement saying that the stratospheric controlled perturbation experiment, golly, which had also secured Harvard funding, will not go ahead as planned in June. Quote, SSC has had dialogues this spring with both leading experts on geoengineering and with other stakeholders, as well as with the Scopex Advisory Board. As a result of these dialogues and in agreement with Harvard, SSC has decided not to conduct the technical test flight planned for this summer. The scientific community is divided regarding geoengineering, including any related technology tests, such as the planned technical balloon test flight from S-Range this summer. Again, we have a baseline, people, and that is quite an accomplishment. As I've mentioned previously, a critical nuclear bomb experiment was performed in Soldier Field in Chicago. Yeah, that's where the Bears play. No, let's not go out to some cornfield. Let's do it in the middle of Chicago because nothing could possibly go wrong. The hubris of these people. Let's go back to the chat here. Texas Feral Hog says, it's a war against us. Yo Mama says, see Montgomery Burns territory. Yes, indeed. Doesn't Steve Jobs' widow own the Atlantic, says Dan. Indeed, she does. Awesome list of books, says MF Superstar. MF Superstar also says, I recently asked a nephew, about 20 years old, if he knew the Easter story. He barely did. When Mel Gibson's movie, The Passion of the Christ, came out, I wrote about it. I think the movie's a failure. Why is it in a language that no one understands, Aramaic, and that the actors literally didn't understand what they were saying? Also, it is not shown how Jesus Christ became a public enemy. So the torture and death which is meted out to him seems to a large extent gratuitous. As I said at the time, how long ago did that movie come out? 15 years ago or something? As I said at the time, it is simply not sufficient to say that everyone knows the story of Jesus because they don't. They don't. Respectable commenting name says, how long until you need a vaccine pass on your right hand or forehead to partake in mass conducted by a trans person? Metal Mike quotes a famous song from the 1980s. Our lips are sealed. Let's see. MF Superstar says, I think Gore Vidal would say there's no such thing as homosexuals, just men who prefer to have sex with men. But that's what homosexuality means, as opposed to gay, which does not mean the same thing at all. Gay is a revolutionary ideology. Texas Feral Hog says we should only block the sun during an extreme emergency. Metal Mike disagrees with me about Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ. Also, the music in that film was just overbearing and unbearable. But a lot of modern movies are like that now. North Korea, the horrible place, right? Not at all like us. Not at all like our countries. Someone sent me some excerpts from a book which was published in 2010 called Nothing to Envy, Ordinary Lives in North Korea by Barbara Demick. And I want to read from this. This is a young man, a student, manages to start listening to South Korean radio broadcasts. And this had a profound effect on him. He was different from everybody else. He was suddenly self-conscious, burdened by a secret he had discovered about himself. At first, he thought his life would be dramatically different with his newfound clarity. In fact, it was much the same as ever before. He went through the motions of being a loyal subject. On Saturday mornings, he showed up punctually at the ideological lectures at the university. The Workers' Party secretary, droning on about the legacy of Kim Il-sung, sounded like he was on autopilot. In winter, when the auditorium was unheated, the lecturer would wrap up as quickly as possible. Jun Sang often snuck a peek at the other members of the audience. There were usually about 500 people, mostly graduate students and postdoctoral fellows. During the lecture, they jiggled their feet and sat on their hands to stay warm. But their faces were still and expressionless, as blank as mannequins in a department store window. He realized suddenly he wore the same vacant expression on his face. In fact, they all probably felt exactly the same way he did about the contents of the lecture. They all know, he nearly screamed. He was so certain. These were supposedly the finest young minds in the nation. Anybody with a functioning brain cannot not know that something is wrong. Jun Sang realized that he was not the only non-believer out there. He was even convinced that he could recognize a form of silent communication that was so subtle it didn't even rise to the level of a wink or a nod. One of the university students, a young woman, gained some acclaim when she wrote in her diary about her admiration for the dear leader. An article about her in Rodong Sinmun, and she won an award for her loyalty. The university students ribbed her mercilessly. They thought she was a freak, but because they couldn't say so, they just teased her instead. It was impossible to start a book club or conduct a political discussion. Any free exchange of ideas would invariably lead to forbidden territory. In any group of 3 or 4 people, there had to be at least one spy for the various intelligence agencies. Jun Sang suspected that his best friend from high school was a government informer. The boy had been the school's best student, even better than Jun Sang, but he couldn't attend university in Pyongyang because a childhood case of polio had left him with a limp. When Jun Sang came home from Pyongyang, the friend would complain loudly about the government, encouraging Jun Sang to respond. There was something bold and contrived in his tone that made Jun Sang worry about entrapment. He avoided the friend entirely. He reminded himself, you don't talk politics as long as you live in North Korea. Not with your best friend, not with your teachers or your parents, or certainly not with your girlfriend. Jun Sang never discussed his feelings about the regime with Mi-ran, his girlfriend. He didn't tell her he was watching South Korean television and reading pamphlets about capitalism. He certainly did not tell her that he'd begun to harbor fantasies of defecting. Without lapsing into hyperbole, I would encourage you to ponder this. How close is our own society come to that of North Korea? Everyone with the same look on their face? Well, everyone has the same look on their face now because we're forced to wear masks. He says it was impossible to start a book club. Well, I knew someone who started book clubs, and rigorous vetting was involved. And there was this constant fear that a federal agent was being introduced into this fellow's book club because he wanted to discuss books, older books, books about history, books about patriotism, whatever, I suppose, approved books. I'm not talking about the Turner Diaries or anything like that. Nothing like that. But just this constant fear of Mobies, as they're called. Discussion groups, in fact. I've been to several of them. And again, this constant fear that someone, maybe more than one people, is a federal agent in the room. Now, I know that Canada is much worse than the United States in that respect. But again, North Korea rails against its enemies, and North Korea has a lot of enemies, no question about that. But no, we face the threat of extremism, of right-wing extremism, of white supremacism, which is the ultimate threat, the threat of threats. And so any means are required to combat this threat, because such talk about, some book about history written by a British general in the 1950s, we can't have that. Glub Pasha, I'm referring to. We can't have that discussion because it might lead to, violence. Well, actually, if governments were really concerned about speech that could lead to violence, they would ban Black Lives Matter. Because the type of rhetoric that BLM engages in infuriates people. It infuriates Black people. It leads them to believe that there is a genocide going on against them. It leads them to believe, as what King LeBron said, that every time a Black person leaves his or her house, the state is trying to kill them. That is the kind of talk that gets people killed. But instead, this talk is actually hailed, and we must bend the knee to it. Let's talk about China. From Rachel Gilmore at Global News. We're coming to get you. China's critics facing threats, retaliation for activism in Canada. In July 2019, Mehmet Toti was just hours away from speaking publicly to politicians about the Chinese government's horrific abuse of the Uyghur population in Xinjiang when he received a message on Twitter, "Your effing mother is dead," it read. Toti had lost contact with his mother in late 2016. 3 years earlier, he had started to become more vocal about the mass detention and abuse of the Uyghur population in Xinjiang, publicly calling it a genocide and alleging the existence of concentration camps. And then my mother and 37 family members, close relatives, disappeared. Since October 23rd, 2016, no phone, no message, nothing. His story is just one of many activists who speak out against the Chinese government in Canada. Despite being separated by an ocean, the Chinese Communist Party and its supporters have methods of keeping activists in Canada under their thumb, and there's very little that Canadian law enforcement can do about it. Well, there's one thing that the Canadian government can do, is to not take in these tens of thousands of people from Hong Kong, because a very significant proportion of these people are going to be working for the Chinese Communist Party. It is the position of the CCP that Chinese everywhere outside of China, well, they're still Chinese, and their primary allegiance is to communist China. That would seem to me to disqualify immigration from China. Full stop. So in Canada, we have had for decades now this ongoing, after Muslim immigration was encouraged. So now we have these battles between supporters of Israel and Palestine. Now, once again, I'm a lifelong Zionist for what it's worth, but Israel ranks about, 114th in my concerns as a Canadian. But no, the top political issue in Canada is, whose side are you on? Israel or the Palestinians? That is not an issue of interest or significance to Canadians. And now, are you on the side of the dissidents or on the side of the Chinese government? Why is that our business? For decades, we have been importing people who are determined to bring their nasty parochial quarrels to our peaceful country. And with regard to the China question, it is no longer peaceful. We've had several incidents in Vancouver of anti-Chinese government expression being torn down, of people being attacked. But this should not be a Canadian problem. And of course, our government, business, academia has been suborned by communist China. The question is, how much? How much? It's obviously not total, or the Canadian government would have released that woman who was arrested in Vancouver at the behest of the United States government. But on the other hand, 2 Canadian citizens in China are kidnapped by the Chinese government. And what do we do about that precious little? Because apparently we can't get our cheap tat from anywhere else. Well, there are plenty of other countries besides China that produce cheap tat. Oh, yes, Canadian exporters will be upset. Well, you know, I can understand them being upset at the loss of a market, but I think the loss of a country is far more important than that. Apparently, Canada does not have laws against clandestine foreign influence, according to Stephanie Carvin, a Carleton University professor and former CSIS analyst. Clandestine foreign influence refers to secretive efforts by a foreign government to influence policy or action abroad, in layman's term, spy missions. Yes, again, better not to have people from China in our countries then. Dual loyalties. Here's a story of dual loyalties, or one dual loyalty. Rising Canadian athlete switches citizenship, hoping to compete for China in Tokyo Olympics. That's a heartwarming story. Nina Schultz was just 19 years old when the world realized it had a serious new contender in the heptathlon. Yes, the women's heptathlon. The whole world was waiting for exciting news on that subject. The New Westminster, BC native captured a silver medal for Canada at the last Commonwealth Games, finishing behind the international number 1. At a moment of bitter tensions between Canada and China, she has taken on Chinese citizenship and hopes to compete for her adopted country in this year's Tokyo Olympics. The reasons, Schultz has said, are deeply personal and seem to predate the current turmoil. Still, some critics of the regime in Beijing question her choice. Her maternal grandmother in China once held the high jump world record, but could never compete for that nation in the Olympics because it was boycotting the games at the time. Her grandfather was a Chinese record holder in the high jump. The granddaughter expressed a wish as long ago as 2017 to achieve what her mother's mother could not. Well, if she wants to become a Chinese citizen, she wants to compete for China, perhaps the Canadian government should bill her for all her education and training expenses. Sounds reasonable enough to me. Of course, I'm trying to remember it wasn't Ben Johnson who was an Olympic gold medalist in 100 meters. The fellow after him, that after he had won, Ben Johnson was disgraced for doping, but this nice young fellow came along, apparently not a doper, and he won the medal. And the first thing he said was Jamaica forever, and was running around with a Jamaican flag, because that's just, you know, trains in the United States, sees his first loyalty to Jamaica. That's just a typical modern Canadian. Let's go to the chat. Yes, Jay Miller says Schultz is as Chinese as it gets. Halper says the first half of Apocalypto is good, and then it turns into a fairly standard Hollywood action. I quite like Apocalypto. I'm trying to think, it's the only one of Mel Gibson's movies that I like. Well, he directed that movie. Metal Mike says the crazed man who killed a cop today with his car at the Capitol, a Nation of Islam follower. The media have been busy linking him to Trump. Texas Feral Hog says feds in the room are assumed. I have, over the years, been accused, or it's been hinted to me that I might be a Fed, and I thought, well, this would have to be the best, the deepest deep cover operation in history. That, why don't you just we'll put you underground, okay? And for over 15 years, you're going to be in dire poverty or close to it. Yeah, that would have to be a very long-term plan. William Hicks says, I didn't care for The Passion of the Christ either. It's masochistic. I like Jim Caviezel, though. Really enjoyed his performance in The Count of Monte Cristo. Texas Feral Hog says Gates is going to plan which volcanoes to trigger to belch enough ash to dim the sun. Okay. So, what are we going to talk about next? Oh, Texas GOP candidate bashes Chinese immigrants over coronavirus. You know, it struck me this week with all this fuss about Asians being attacked in the United States, well, by black people, but we're not supposed to say that because it's really Donald Trump responsible. So I'm thinking that now Asians in the United States are getting a taste of the terror that whites live in every single day. But we're not allowed to talk about that second terror. This is from the Washington Post, Andrea Salcedo. At a political forum on Wednesday, GOP congressional candidate Sari Kim falsely suggested that Chinese immigrants bring the coronavirus to the United States. How do you know that's false, Andrea? And suggested that she opposes their entry to the country. I don't want them here at all, said Kim, who is Korean American. They steal our intellectual property. It's true. They give us coronavirus. Yeah, I think that's true too. They don't hold themselves accountable. Kim, 42, also argued that a rising surge in violence and threats against Asian Americans has been trumped up by the media, saying that Asians have always faced violence. It's not worse than before. The comments left Kim, who served under Trump in the Small Business Administration, facing blowback from both supporters and opponents. Republican California Representatives Young Kim and Michelle Steele, who endorsed Kim in March, told CNN they had told her that the comments were wrong. Sari's comments were unacceptable and hurtful, especially at a time when hate targeting the Asian American, the acronym AAPI was used. What exactly do Pacific Islanders have to do with Chinese or Koreans or Indians or Pakistanis or Burmese? What do they have to do with them? This is an enormous expanse of territory you're talking about. All the way from what? Hawaii to Afghanistan? That's pretty much half the world. Kim's office did not immediately respond to a message from the Washington Post late Thursday. She told CNN that she had meant to direct her comments at the Chinese government. She also said, I can say this because I'm Korean. Okay. So that's what America has come to. Well, my country has come to the same thing. It's just all about race. It is all about race. But this, Korean versus Chinese thing, more evidence that, intersectionality is inherently unstable, that it leads to the war of all against all. And, John Boehner. Yes, the teak-faced crybaby. He is going to tell the Republicans what's what. He has a book coming out on April the 13th called On the House. Why anyone at all would be interested in what John Boehner has to say about anything is an interesting question. And apparently these Republicans just out of control. I had to explain to the newcomers how things got done. A lot of that went straight through the ears of most of them, especially the ones who didn't have the brains that got in the way. Incrementalism, compromise, that wasn't their thing. A lot of them wanted to blow up Washington. That's why they thought they were elected. Some of them, you could tell they weren't paying attention because they were just thinking of how to fundraise off of outrage. Oh, and John Boehner never did that. Or how they could get on Hannity that night. Ronald Reagan used to say something to the effect that if I get 80 or 90% of what I want, that's a win. These guys wanted 100% every time. In fact, I don't think that would satisfy them because they didn't really want legislative victories. They wanted wedge issues and conspiracies. Well, the left, and now the Democratic Party, wants 100% every time. And guess what? They keep making advances. To them, my talk of trying to get anything done made me a sellout, a dupe of the Democrats, and a traitor. Some of them had me in their sights from day one. They saw me as much of an enemy as the guy in the White House. Me, a guy who would come to the top of the leadership by exposing corruption and pushing conservative ideas. More on corruption later. Now I was a liberal collaborator, so that took some getting used to. What I had also not anticipated was the extent to which this new crowd hated, and I mean hated, Barack Obama. By 2011, the right-wing propaganda nuts had managed to turn Obama into a toxic brand for conservatives. When I was first elected to Congress, we didn't have any propaganda organization for conservatives, except maybe a magazine or two like National Review. The only people who used the internet were some geeks in Palo Alto. There was no Drudge Report, no Breitbart, no kooks on YouTube spreading dangerous nonsense like they did every day about Obama. Yeah. What do we know about this John Boehner fellow? Oh, he served in the U.S. House of Representatives he served as Speaker. When was he first elected? Well, we'll get to that. There has been a considerable infrastructure on the right, conservative infrastructure, far more than National Review, going back to the 1970s. And the people like Boehner, the Republicans, they paid a great deal of attention to it. But now he's pretending that it didn't exist. Bagman. Let's see, I'm reading from Wikipedia here. In June 1995, Boehner distributed campaign contributions from tobacco industry lobbyists on the House floor as House members were weighing how to vote on tobacco subsidies. In a 1996 PBS documentary, Boehner said, "They asked me to give out a half dozen checks quickly before we got to the end of the month, and I complied. And I did it on the House floor, which I regret. I should not have done. It's not a violation of the House rules, but it's a practice that's gone on here for a long time that we're trying to stop, and I know I'll never do it again." A September 2010 story in the New York Times said Boehner was tightly bound to lobbyists and that, quote, he maintains especially tight ties with a circle of lobbyists and former aides representing some of the nation's biggest businesses, including Goldman Sachs, Google, Citigroup, R.J. Reynolds, Miller Coors, and UPS. And so what is John Boehner up to now? Dope. And that's right. Dope. He's a dope pusher now. In 2018, Boehner joined the board of Acreage Holdings, a cannabis corporation, to promote the medical use of cannabis and advocate for the federal descheduling of the drug, a shift from his previous stance while in Congress. In 2019, Boehner was named chair of the National Cannabis Roundtable, a cannabis lobbying organization. Yeah, you can't get much more conservative than that, can you? And again, another reason why you don't want to call yourself a conservative, because all of these people have this unfortunate tendency to end up like Boehner, the teak-faced crybaby. This is from Arnold Kling's blog, and he's commenting on a ABC News story, Obama-era officials return to White House worth millions. And the particular fellow that we are talking about here, just give me a sec, is National Economic Council Director Brian Deese. Deese's wealth has also multiplied dramatically since 2009 when he took his first White House job as Obama's Special Assistant for Economic Policy. In 2015, just a few months into his role as Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget, Deese reported owning between $81,000 and $215,000 in assets. But now, as a member of the Biden administration, he's reported between $2 million and $7.2 million in assets. Prior to joining the Biden administration, Deese made $2.3 million in salary from the investment firm BlackRock as the global head of sustainable investing, compared to the $175,000 in salary he received during his last year as Obama's deputy OMB director. Kling comments, BlackRock is the firm that handles the Fed's investments in private securities. BlackRock is also known for pushing progressive values onto corporations. If your goal is to get rich, there is no need to produce anything of value as long as your ideology and connections work for you. Yes, they call it doing well while doing good. Oh, Hunter Biden is now saying, oh, yeah, that laptop, yeah, it could absolutely be mine. And the New York Post is both furious and amused by this, as well they might be. Certainly could be, Hunter Biden tells CBS Sunday Morning when a reporter finally asks him why the media avoided asking him and his dad during the 2020 campaign, is the laptop yours? But being a Biden, he can't help but prevaricate. Certainly, there could be a laptop out there that was stolen from me. It could be that I was hacked. It could be that it was Russian intelligence. It could be that it was stolen from me. Oh, Hunter, you're so full of it. The troubled son knows that he left the laptop at a Delaware repair shop and then forgot about it. How could he forget about something like that? Well, he admits that he's relapsed on drugs as recently as last year's presidential campaign. The Post interviewed the owner of the computer repair shop. We checked the dates and content of some of the emails against real-life events. We looked at the literally thousands of pictures of Hunter Biden on the hard drive. We did the reporting. It's his laptop. When we asked Hunter Biden and the Joe Biden campaign in 2020, they dodged the question and called it a conspiracy theory and suggested vaguely he might have been hacked. The press, usually on guard for a non-denial denial, played along. The laptop was unverified. No one bothered to ask the campaign any follow-up questions, even though the laptop repairman backed up the story to other outlets. Twitter took its cue from the Democrats and blocked our account, a move Jack Dorsey now calls a total mistake. Now that he's finally conceded that, yes, it's probably his, perhaps reporters will start asking the other questions they didn't ask in the fall of 2020. Did you plan on going into business with your father on a massive Chinese investment fund? For how long was Joe involved? Is Tony Bobulinski lying when he says he met with Joe Biden about this endeavor and the current president said, look after my family? An email says the split on that endeavor was 20 H, 10 Jim, and 10 held for H by the big guy. Is Joe Biden the big guy? Why did the Chinese oligarch behind that fund give you a diamond? How long did he pay you for? What did you do for him? In your emails, an official for the Ukrainian gas company, Burisma, thanks you for meeting your father. Joe Biden's campaign said no official meeting ever took place. Was there an informal meeting? How much did you discuss with your dad what you were doing? There are many more. Hunter and Joe won't answer us. We've tried. They'd rather just shout smear campaign and hack. How long is the media going to buy it? Well, for as long as Joe Biden's president. I suppose if he has a nasty fall down the stairs leading to Air Force One, or he gets mauled to death by one of his German shepherds, then the media will no longer be forced to carry water for Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. This is from Steve Nelson at the New York Post. National Public Radio has corrected an online article that falsely asserted that documents from first son Hunter Biden's laptop had been, quote, discredited by U.S. intelligence, unquote. A book review of Hunter Biden's memoir, Beautiful Things, initially dismissed the documents first reported in October by the Post. The laptop story was discredited by U.S. intelligence and in independent investigations by news organizations, the book review by Ron Elving initially claimed. The correction on the Thursday article now says, quote, a previous version of the story said U.S. intelligence had discredited the laptop story. U.S. intelligence officials have not made a statement to that effect, unquote. Again, you know, when David Mamet's movie Spartan came out, I believe 2001, the right-wing media was not very pleased with it. Kyle Smith, who is now with National Review, he just thought that this was preposterous, the plot. Oh, is it really all that preposterous, given what we know now? One of my favorite scenes in the movie is that there is a claim that a very significant death has occurred and that a body has been found. And Val Kilmer says, how did they fake the DNA? And the woman who works in the White House says, they don't have to fake the DNA. They just issue a press release. It really is that simple. Oh, yeah. Interesting piece at the American Thinker. San Francisco's corrupt politicians exposed in a Twitter thread. I was talking about Californian corruption just the other day, I believe yesterday, with regard to the lawyer who was married to one of the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, who defrauded his clients for decades and was protected by the legal system of California all the way up to Governor Gavin Newsom. Andrea Widberg writes, when we think of corrupt American cities, Chicago always tops the list. However, San Francisco has long been one of the more corrupt American civic governments. However, because the city was still better managed than Chicago, nobody really commented on that. So there's examples here, but here's the best one. This is from Chris Sacca, and he is used to invest in startups, he said. Had fun on ABC's Shark Tank. Sacca tweeted on March the 27th, 15 years ago, I co-led a team trying to give 100% free internet access to all of San Francisco, starting with the poorest neighborhoods first. The network would be anonymous with no ads, no cookies, etc. Approximately a 20 to 25 million gift. The result, we were chased out of town. One San Francisco supervisor told us she would vote against it unless we promised to fund quarterly field trips, e.g. to the zoo, for the kids in her district. Another promised to vote against it because we wouldn't give free laptops to all of San Francisco. One superintendent rejected it because poor people needed training to use the net. Countless low, no-income residents spoke at hearings about how they had computers and knew how to use the web but couldn't afford Comcast. Superintendents mansplained back to those very people that they were wrong. We built a demonstration network and a public housing project in Hunters Point. It was saturated with use. Those residents testified that laptops and phones weren't expensive. Cable and data plans were the problem. The superintendents just couldn't accept that those people were net savvy. Ultimately, one supervisor told us straight up, he didn't care what this meant for the people of his district. He was blocking it because it would give the mayor a win in a political year. He was the deciding vote, and I will never forget what he said. Stop lecturing me about the digital divide because I don't give a fuck. Now get the hell out of my office. Our team walked out stunned, sat in the lobby of City Hall, and realized it was over. My partners and I had done Q&A sessions in every superintendent's district and in community and senior centers all over town. Support for the network was off the charts, particularly among those who needed it most. But it was clear that the superintendents didn't care about poor San Franciscans. They wouldn't listen to their own constituents. They perpetuated racist tropes and demeaning stereotypes about their poorest residents. And for what? It was all a big game to the politicians. The winners were their superintendents' egos, and the losers were the people they supposedly served. Let's see, epilogue. After San Francisco rejected our offer, we built a free citywide network in Mountain View, California. About 12 to 15,000 people used it every day for years. The majority of them spoke Spanish as their primary language and told us they couldn't afford regular internet access. Is this just perversity? That a man comes along and says, free Wi-Fi for everybody. And the superintendents of the city of San Francisco said, why would we be interested in that? Or what else can you give us? Yes, one laughs lest one weep, as Gogol once wrote. Well, let's look at the chat here. Texas Feral Hog says Elon Musk is hiring 5,000 people for a space company at the southern tip of Texas, and he's hiring 10,000 near Austin for the factories he's building in that area. Is Boehner similar to Kasich? Kasich is more hostile. He's more, genuinely leftist. Boehner is just, he seems to be genuinely hurt that, the Tea Party comes along and we're not putting up with the Republican Party standing for big money and against the working class anymore. He couldn't believe it. Yeah, but abortion. What have you ever done in Congress to stop abortion, John Boehner? But we're against it. Oh, Capital gains taxes. Yeah. Okay. Working class is really interested in that. Manfred von Thistlebaum says there's a shop here in Omaha that says it now sells THC products, yet weed is still illegal here. It confounds me. A famous Canadian marijuana advocate was arrested and served a considerable amount of time in American prison. This wasn't all that long ago, for sending Americans, pot implements, whatever they call it, to the United States, from Canada to the United States. And the United States government indicted him and demanded that he be extradited to the United States, and he was convicted and sent to prison. I saw campaign ads for Boehner on Dayton TV, and they were very, very Boehner's one of us, shaking hands with farmers, etc. Very slick and phony, says Yo Mama. Well, Boehner's got a permatan, and he's had a permatan for a long, long time. I have a rule about that. I do not trust anyone with a permatan, wait, does Donald Trump have a permatan? I don't know. That may be just bronzer. The Prince of Pot, they called him. His name was Mark something or other. Okay. Oh, this is funny. This is on the subject of government corruption and phoniness. Tim Zeraland tweets, Pete Buttigieg's dog and pony show. Use an armored Suburban to bring a bike within a short distance of the destination, unload it, and ride in with a security detail in tow, pretending to save energy. At least, Boris Johnson, for all his faults, actually does ride a bicycle, for some distance. Why would anyone want to ride a bicycle when they could get a ride? Streets are not very hospitable to bicycles. It's a dangerous mode of transportation. Yes, as long as we're on the subject of government corruption, this is published today from the mysterious DNYUZ site. Just as the Biden administration is pushing to raise taxes on corporations, a new study finds that at least 55 of America's largest paid no taxes last year on billions of dollars in profits. The sweeping tax bill passed in 2017 by a Republican Congress and signed into law by President Trump reduced the corporate tax rate to 21% from 35%. But dozens of Fortune 500 companies were able to further shrink their tax bill, sometimes to zero, thanks to a range of legal deductions and exemptions that have become staples of the tax code. Salesforce, Archer Daniels Midland, and Consolidated Edison were among those named in the report by the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, a left-leaning research group in Washington. 26 of the companies listed, including FedEx, Duke Energy, and Nike, were able to avoid paying any income tax for the last 3 years, even though they reported a combined income of $77 billion. Many also received millions of dollars in tax rebates. Look, I understand companies taking advantage of so-called loopholes, but of course they're also lobbying for these same loopholes. This tremendously complicated tax system, it benefits accountants. It doesn't benefit ordinary people because ordinary Americans tend to get into a lot of trouble. They get threatened with jail even. And the IRS says, you owe us some stupendous amount of money. Well, I took this deduction, and there it is in the tax code. Yes, that was on page 853 on the tax code, but on page 3,412, it says this. Oh, so what you're saying is that cancels that out? Yes, that's exactly what we're saying. So you're going to pay us a stupendous amount of money, and while we decide whether we're going to criminally prosecute you for tax evasion. But that's not a problem that FedEx, say, has to worry about. And I think I'm going to no Burnham today. Stop cheering. And I'm going to move on to the book club. And let's see. We are talking about a book which is by Evelyn Waugh. And just Let me get to the title here. Here we go. Evil and Waugh, The Life of the Right Reverend Ronald Knox. And I've talked about Evil and Waugh before. He's one of my favorite authors. I think that he is the greatest English language writer of the 20th century. I feel very strongly about that. Waugh was born in 1903 and died in 1966. He is renowned for his novels. I suppose Brideshead Revisited is the most famous, but he also wrote several biographies, critical studies. He wrote an enormous amount of journalism as well. And he published many travel books, which are very much worth reading. Waugh was of the opinion that a writer was essentially a craftsman, that it wasn't about the transmutation of personal experience. It wasn't about emotion. It was about craft, about working with language, making the best of the English language as one could. And this book about Ronald Knox, and I'll tell you briefly about Ronald Knox. He was a Catholic priest. He came from an Anglican family. His father was an Bishop of Manchester, the Anglican Bishop of Manchester. Knox was born in 1888 and died in 1957. He'd been a friend of Waugh's for quite a number of years, and Knox paid him the honor of dedicating his most important work of theology, published in 1950, and was called Enthusiasm, to Evelyn Waugh. You learn a lot in this biography about the great Anglican controversy of the 19th and early 20th century. Specifically, the controversy that followed the rise of the so-called Oxford movement. Now, the Oxford movement, which started around the 1840s, say, held essentially that there had been no Reformation in England, that there had been a change in the leadership of the Anglican Church, the Church of England, that its head was the king, but it was essentially the Roman Church. And this turned out to be a very popular movement in Anglican circles, and it led to a revival of what they call smells and bells. You know, elaborate clerical gear and elaborate clerical rituals and elaborate clerical architecture. Before the Oxford movement, the Anglican Church had been for hundreds of years low, as they say, low and evangelical. And the evangelicals within the Anglican Church, including Ronald Knox's father, the Bishop of Manchester, they thought that the Oxford movement was, pretty close to heresy. And they fought it. They fought it ferociously. The Oxford movement did have a tremendous, we associate the Church of England, the Anglican Church, with smells and bells, although not all the churches are like that. It had a tremendous effect on English Catholicism as well, because essentially the position of the Oxford movement was nonsense. It was not supportable. That, no, nothing really much happened in the middle of the 16th century. Just some, procedural things. No, it was an earthquake. And so many of the leading figures of the Oxford movement, including John Henry Newman and Henry Manning and many others, became Catholics. We find out from Waugh's biography of Ronald Knox that Knox's way to the Catholic Church began through Anglo-Catholicism, the Oxford movement, High Church. And I suppose, his father bitterly lamented in later life. His father pretty much cut him out of his life, cut him out of his will when Knox became a Catholic cleric. When you begin this book by Evelyn Waugh, you know that you're in safe hands. I'll give you a taste of the prose here. Ronald Knox lacked only longevity to be a national figure. Had he lived to be 80, he would, most unwillingly, have found himself assumed into that odd circle of ancient savants and charlatans whom the sovereign delights to honor, and the popular press treats with some semblance of reverence. He died at 69, still essentially a private person. This book, I surmise, will prove to be the forerunner of many weightier studies of him. Its primary purpose is to tell the story of his exterior life, not to give a conspectus of his thought, still less to measure his spiritual achievements. His published works provide abundant material for research and criticism by specialists in many subjects. Here, I have attempted to give the essential biographical facts they will need. How do I come to be writing it, the reader may ask? In 1950, Ronald asked me if he might appoint me in his will as his sole literary executor. There was not much more than 15 years between us. The clergy are notoriously longer lived than the laity. I did not think it likely my services would be needed. But he put my name down and left it there. One of my duties was to appoint his official biographer. He was himself one of Hilaire Belloc's literary executors, and 3 years later, when we were discussing the choice of Belloc's biographer, I raised the question of his own. Yes, I suppose someone will want to write something, he said without enthusiasm. He had grown up in a tradition by which everyone had some literary commemoration, even the men of 20 who were killed in battle, and he regarded the attention of a biographer as an inevitable concomitant of death, like that of the coffin maker and grave digger. Later, he spoke of writing his autobiography. Until the end of 1956, it did not occur to me that I should outlive him. Early in 1957, it seemed probable that I would do so, and I conceived the ambition of attempting the portrait myself. At the end of June, when I knew he was dying, he gave me instructions about his papers. I then asked for his approval of my project. He gave it. He could hardly have refused. But next day, he wrote to a friend reporting my suggestion in terms which leave me in no doubt that his acquiescence was not prompted by mere politeness. He was well aware of the limitations of our friendship. I knew him primarily as a man of letters rather than as a priest. That is to say, I never went to confession to him or asked him for spiritual or moral advice. He knew also my curiosity and lack of discretion. He knew the kind of book I was likely to write, and I believe this is what he wanted, or rather was prepared to tolerate, as distinct from what a sober scholar or edifying colleague might have written. If the picture I have drawn seems somber, it is not inadvertence. You see how simple and direct is the phrase they use. You see how simple and direct Waugh's prose is? It's really quite bracing, especially given what's written today, where everyone seems to think that they're Tom Wolfe or equivalent. Ooh, let's be zany. Let's see how much we can wring out of the English language. And it's almost all terrible. Absolutely terrible. Waugh talked about his lack of discretion, and there's an amusing story, which happens to be true, about the publication of this book, that there was a man whom Waugh called C, which was the same way that he was discussed in Ronald Knox's own A Spiritual Aeneid. And this was known to be a very prominent person in Britain who had been at Eton, as Knox had been, and that he had been a tutor to this younger man, and that he was attracted to Anglo-Catholicism, only there was an intervention by a relative which ended that. Malcolm Muggeridge, the once famous journalist and gadfly, wrote after the publication of this book, well, that C was Harold Macmillan, who, of course, was Prime Minister of Great Britain at the time, which caused an absolute sensation. Waugh was absolutely furious about this because he was a man of little discretion, but since he honored Ronald Knox's memory so, and did not want to cause unnecessary offense to Harold Macmillan, he had said nothing to anyone about this. Well, he'd certainly not spoken to the press about it. And he grilled, Evelyn Waugh grilled his son, Oberon Waugh, who later became a novelist and a journalist, my favorite journalist, as it turns out, about who could possibly be responsible for this. And Oberon Waugh suggested that the culprit was likely Lady Pamela Barry, who was married to the proprietor of the Telegraph. And actually, Waugh was a friend of Pam Barry's. But he bought this story immediately. That, yes, I should have known that it was her, he said. Oberon Waugh wrote in his own biography that he lacked the courage to tell his father, Evelyn, that it was he who had leaked this information to Malcolm Muggeridge. Ronald Knox was considered by many to be the cleverest man in England. Besides his work as a priest and his many works of both what you might say popular and serious theology, he was also a master of the detective story, and he drew up what might be called a decalogue of rules for the writing of detective stories, which has been highly influential. Knox also single-handedly translated both the Old and New Testament into English based on the Latin Vulgate, although he consulted other sources, Hebrew and Greek. Knox had been reading Latin and Greek since he was 5 or 6 years old, and he knew many other languages as well. He was a popular radio broadcaster, and he, in 1926, he made a fake show called Broadcasting the Barricades. 1926 was the year of the general strike, and so he came up with a radio broadcast of actual revolution in London, Soviet style, including government ministers being murdered on the streets and the destruction of some of London's most famous monuments. And apparently, a great many people were taken in by this. And there was quite a stir. And it's been suggested many times that Orson Welles knew about this. And this was the germ for what became his more infamous broadcast, The War of the Worlds, in 1938. Knox was an outstanding parodist. But he was also, I suppose this is a particularly English thing, that people who are fond of parody, satire, are thought to be not serious, And well, that's not true. It's not true. Knox wrote a satire called Reunion, all round. What it is satirizing is the later Anglican belief that, we can get along with anyone. We can be in communion with anyone. And this Reunion all round, which came out in the 1920s, is a plea for the inclusion within the Church of England of all Mohammedans, that is Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, Brahmins, Papists, and atheists submitted to the consideration of the British public. Yes, this would require the abolishing of bishops, the last judgment postponed, the proposal for a Orthodox church, the Unitarians set aside. Muhammad was a good Protestant, a proposal for universal bigamy and of joint stools. And yes, hang on, he had something. Yes, the shocking fecundity of the Irish. Knox wrote, I know we are commonly told that this will never be achieved by reason of the extreme obstinacy and perversity of this sect, which will never allow them to come to any conditions. But this obstinacy of the Irish, I apprehend, is nothing else than the confidence of numbers. They are at present a pretty numerous body, and they will soon be brought to see reason when they find their own adherents becoming rarer every day. That this will speedily happen, science itself gives us warrant to avow, for we know now that all survival in the world is a survival of the fittest, and that two instincts chiefly make an organism fit to survive, namely the will to live and the desire to propagate its kind. The Church of Rome pays the highest veneration to martyrs and to celibates or virgins, thereby attesting its contempt for these two great instincts which alone enable a race to persist. It might therefore be allowed to become extinct by the force of its own ignorant delusions, but I hold it a more charitable thing to arrest this decline when it is once fairly set in, and invite the survivors, many of them good enough fellows at heart, into the all-embracing unity of our national establishments. True, hitherto these symptoms of decline have been slow to manifest themselves, and it is even alleged that popery is on the increase in certain parts of the world, notably in our own island, in America, in Australia, in France, and in Holland. But it is not to be supposed that any such observed augmentation of numbers is due to conversions. On the contrary, it has been repeatedly proved that nobody has ever converted to the Roman Catholic religion. In England, America, and Australia, the whole cause of increase is the immigration of Irishmen, and it cannot be doubted that a few more characteristics would show to everyone's satisfaction that Irishmen are emigrating in very great quantities to both France and to Holland. These melancholy facts bear testimony both to the prolific character of a race, which can thus stock 5 countries with papists from year to year, and also to its singular obstinacy and bigotry, and that it carries its religion about with it like a part of its luggage, and must needs attempt to transplant it into an alien soil where it was never meant to flourish. Such opinionated arrogance must be firmly dealt with, and I would therefore suggest, in the interests of the reunion of religions, that upon his conquest of Ireland, our great commander, Sir E.C., should put all papist children to the sword, and we should make it a criminal offense for the future that any papist should be allowed to marry or have issue, the offense itself to be punished with death, and the resulting issue to be exposed on some hillside, lest it grow up infected with the gross superstition of its parents. Can you imagine any Catholic priest writing anything like this 100 years later? No, you can't. Can you? And you see the power of Knox's prose there. Also his genius as a satirist. It was sad for me to reread this book because it's a discussion of an England that no longer exists. I mean, it's an England that existed before I was born, but never mind that. It's an England that took, ideas seriously. It took religion seriously, certainly. That the men who came to Providence in England a century or so ago were as giants compared to today's pygmies, but I suppose that is true in every country on earth. I highly recommend Evelyn Waugh's work on Ronald Knox. This was truly a labor of love, because it's not a book that was going to make him a lot of money. In fact, it's a sort of book given the clearly the enormous amount of work that he put into it, going through Knox's voluminous papers, reading his writing, interviewing literally hundreds of his friends and acquaintances. This such a sort of investment, and thus Waugh's diversion from more remunerative activities, means that it was a personal sacrifice for him. So those are my thoughts on Ronald Knox by Evelyn Waugh. Hickman Warrior says the Puritans of New England were the Talibans of English Protestantism. Jim Bowden says, KMG, you have blossomed since you left the previous Synagogue of Satan stream. Oh, dear, dear, dear. Appreciate your extensive informative knowledge on various subjects. No. And then the Brits criticize the Ottoman Empire. LOL, says Hickman Warrior. Now England has grime music. MF Superstar. Yes. Swings and roundabouts, as they say. What other of Waugh's books would you suggest? What's a good place to start? Well, a good place to start is at the beginning with his first novel, Decline and Fall. This is a book which Duckworth refused to publish for reasons of smut. What, 1928? And it's a book that still has a great deal of shocking power to it. It's a novel about bad private schools and the type of people who teach at bad private schools, because Waugh had done this at a low point in his life, and about the students that one is liable to find at bad private schools. There's a disinterested quality to sub spici aeternatus, from the eye of eternity, that you find in Waugh's writing. And I suppose, like Stanley Kubrick, a lot of people think it is cruel that he had no feelings or care for others. It's not true. It's just that there's a lack of sentimentality in Waugh. And again, Decline and Fall is a good place to start. Waugh's books are no longer under copyright, so you can find ebooks easily for free. And you can find compilations of all his novels. I'm trying to remember the name of the Delphi. Delphi is an excellent company which puts together collections of works by authors, and now hundreds of them, which they sell, I don't know, for a couple of bucks. So, if you want all of Evelyn Waugh's novels, you can get them for a couple of bucks from Delphi, but in other sources, because as I say, the early ones are no longer in copyright. Okay, did I read Waugh's autobiography, Oberon Waugh's autobiography? Oh, A Little Learning, Evelyn Waugh's autobiography. He ran into a problem there because he was writing about people who were still living, and so he had to be circumspect. Oberon Waugh was not circumspect. Oberon Waugh's autobiography, Will This Do, is one of the greatest autobiographies ever written, and is one of the funniest books ever written. I'll tell you one story from his autobiography. That after the war, after World War II had ended, this would be in 1946 or whatever, the British government, in its beneficence, decided to send a banana to every child in Britain. And yes, food rationing in Britain lasted until 1954, and hard times. So the children of Great Britain looked forward to their government-mandated banana. Waugh had 6 children, and when the bananas arrived, he confiscated them. And he put them in a bowl, and he covered them with sugar, as Waugh said. He covered them with sugar, which was heavily rationed, and cream, which was almost unprocurable, and proceeded to devour the lot. Oberon Waugh tells a lot of similar stories about his father, and one might get the impression that he hated him. He didn't. He loved him. I mean, okay, what is a banana worth compared to a story as glorious as the one I just told you? Okay, So what am I going to be talking about next week? Well, on Music Monday, I'm going to be talking about the sad tale of Hugo Wolf, the Slovenian. Well, it was part of the Austrian Empire there, Windischgratz. That's where he came from. The Slovenian composer, particular favorite of mine. On a Theater Thursday, I am going to be discussing a movie from 2 years ago by Andrew Patterson called The Vast of Night. And on the book club, another English work, this from P.D. James, called The Children of Men. I will be back on the air tomorrow. Not tomorrow. First of all, thank you all for listening, viewing. I will be back on the air Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, very much appreciated at this time in my life. My PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, a donation to this live stream can be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this benediction, and I wish you all of you who are Christians, a worshipful Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and Easter Sunday. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.